And there are a lot of different communities and efforts out to do that. And it's becoming inclusive. And what we're going to do is I'm going to let them each self-introduce. So the deal is they have about 5 minutes to introduce themselves and then to tell you a little bit about what they do. And then I've encouraged them to say at least one very provocative thing, if they can, about the topic to get us started. Sasha, we did talk about this. So.
You said 1 or 2 in our practice.
Okay. Yeah. And then what we're going to do is sort of have a conversation. So we're going to have a discussion, and then what we want to do is bring you guys into that. So we'll have a chance for some questions and things like that. And we would love to bring you in, but when we do it, we want to bring it in the spirit of a conversation, not in the spirit of some people, hopefully no one in this room, often
see. And this year, one of my main responsibilities has been working with multinational companies focused on life.
From kind of an early, obviously funder relationships are one thing, but an early relationship with Dow where we ended up co-investing in one of our companies, Water Health International, and kind of on a very individual acumen to Dow and acumen to some of Dow's staff level, I think have had a very productive kind of journey through that, and we can talk a little bit about what that learning has looked like. To more, corporations as funders and not necessarily really seeing that progress to the partnership, to really now in the last couple of years in particular seeing really more substantive, interesting partnerships with a longer list. Goldman Sachs, Mitsubishi, Dow, on and on. But the biggest one is a partnership that we have with Unilever called the ELI, the Enhancing Livelihoods Initiative, which is focused on working with social enterprises to increase value in their supply chain and to help those social enterprises be more successful and scale. So the member of our team, Yasmina Zaidman, who is really the point person on that, is really the expert on everything that's taken, but I feel like I'll do my best to remember 15 years ago. And so I do have a little bit of a feel of skepticism when I hear the language to think how much has really changed. But I do think that there is a conversation. The momentum in impact investing seems to be, look at us, we're real capitalists. And I feel like that's a funny thing, because I worry that we may arrive there only to discover that we came to the wrong party. Or if anything, I would like us to be kind of both leading towards that future place together.
Enterprises, particularly now in the menstrual health space, which is what I'm in, are doing very small scale, women in from our competitor to our collaborator. So we're not only contract manufacturing with their off time, $5 million each year over the last 5 years, and that's partly due to our lobbying. So many girls and women in Kenya, only so many girls and women in the world. How do we actually leverage our best strengths to serve those together? So an example of that is we have a little kind of map, almost like Chutes and Ladders, I think, to get to. And there's some examples that I can give maybe later of one of our partners.
Respected funder, and I think it gives us an interesting balance, because what we will all view, I'm I guess a little more of an academic, we all view the world a little differently, and rather than ignoring the differences, we want to. But the point being that relationships and time and energy to be successful, yet go to partners. If we're a company, we're not always honest about the true metrics because we don't think the partners will tolerate those, and funders in particular. They want to return in X amount of time, and you're talking about something that takes Y. So a question for us, and there isn't an answer. I look at Giselle not because you can answer this question, but it seems to be a consistent theme of how do we set ourselves up for success, guys? Or you can come back and ask me too. I don't just have to be the interrogator. I'm happy to offer thoughts, but this seems to be a continuing challenge.
I can start. On the metrics side, in some ways, I know Sasha will say it better because I heard him say some of it last week. So I'll defer some of that to him, but I would say on the metrics point, picking up what I said earlier, the world not measuring the same things, and there's a lot of debate about it, and a lot of colleagues of mine who work in that space have talked about feeling this pressure to come up with something different, to show that you are being innovative, and almost reinventing the wheel to create your space there. So I think part of getting away from that is also about this data so we can see what models work, not what examples work. But even that does require trust. And the market is becoming such a thrown around phrase right now because some people want to invest in terms of collaboration around metrics. No one in the space has done a great job of showing the financial value of academia could play a role.
Well, I'm going to throw it back to someone else in a second, but I think that's right.
Metrics can really throw off a potentially wonderful partnership.
So talk about what do you mean by the wrong, when we say metrics, we best be clear.
These are impact metrics for impact investors. They want to create jobs. And we're trying to do the leanest manufacturing possible. Their CEO actually came and we had a roundtable discussion in Nairobi with all of their grantees, and they said, here's what we're thinking about measuring. It's going to get finalized in like another 2 months. Came and visited one of our schools, and we have girls write down their questions on anonymous pieces of paper, and he was blown away.
Question, are you looking for the wrong partners? Or are the right partners just not there? So is this sort of a systemic problem, or is it a subset? Because, you know, one of the arguments that I put out is that sometimes it's better not to partner than to partner with the wrong person. And, you know, sometimes
The nature of these relationships that I think at an executional level is kind of
expertise to come together to solve the problem and work with the entrepreneur. And I think that's a really hopeful thing.
Yeah, so I'm going to throw out a couple things for us to think about. One of them that when we talk with our partners and trying to understand building a partnership is to really understand the metrics that really understand what your partner's after. It's going to be very difficult, and you know, so that's more of a statement.
Another thing I won't get into it, maybe if there'll be a question about it later, but just to tee it up a bit, is even when all partners want to invest in the same thing, how do you make sure the integrity of the intentions of that investment are maintained over time? So in our case, you have these multinational companies investing. They say they want to help smallholders. Everyone wants to help smallholders as part of this. But if you have like a franchise model, how do you make sure that all those franchisees stick to those intentions when they could also just sell to commercial farmers, have a smaller number of customers, and make the same amount of sales? So had some innovation there as well.
So there are a couple, you know, I think when you think of a partnership ecosystem to go to scale, you can either think about it as, you know, how do I as a social entrepreneur take my business to scale, or how do we actually scale the industry? And I think the second question is much more interesting. You know, I'm not in it myself to just see my organization succeed. I want to actually change the system for 1 billion women who are out of it. So a great example is actually yesterday I got the first chance to meet the innovators from Akar Industries, which are in India. And so we sat down this morning and talked about, okay, they've got a biodegradable plastic or compostable plastic outer layer, but it's too thin, so you can't use it on commercial machines. So what would it look like to do a grant together to actually do the R&D, because I have material scientists on my team, to make the plastic compatible to, well, the non-plastic, compatible to run on commercial machines. So if we could do that, we've also got an innovation on the inner layer.
You raise trust, I think, by starting out and saying, here's what I'm going to do well, here's what I'm going to do poorly, and I'm going to lay that all out now, and if you can't kind of weather that storm, or whatever, don't. And I think where things really get messed up is when people don't own that. And I guess my related, which is just sort of on how all of these relationships work and when I've seen them work well and poorly. And my disillusionment as being a professional working in, I sort of think the person you want is the one who sort of seems a little bit like a naysayer, because it's more likely that they're going to be like, and I think you can waste a ton of time if you don't kind of bottom that out. So.
Yeah, I'll just add to some of what Sasha said, and in doing so, try to answer your question, which is, in our experience working with multinational companies, greenfield market, and take what could be seen as a big risk. So I would really support with farmer groups, etc. They're long established. It could potentially be a negative if you didn't maintain those relationships well. True, but I would say it's still an example of some not seeing otherwise. And I brought up that example because I can't think of another example that I know of where someone, so the word exceptional is do otherwise. Yeah.
We're punting on feudalism.
Pardon?
I said we're punting on feudalism.
Well, I do think a lot of these conversation tables, I don't think we're really going to see a gigantic change in emerging economies. I mean, Kenya's GDP, it's getting richer, but on the backs of the poor in some ways too, and we need to change that macroeconomic system if we're going to have our impact investment.
Or a set of enterprises that can truly flourish. And it was sort of going back to what you were saying too about we need
do that and don't want to try to do that, and it's going to not work. So we're just trying to get a lot better. And so there's some things we're doing. So we'll do things like, and it's almost like a paying for time thing, where we'll have a collaboration summit outside Nairobi and invite 20 or 15 or whatever large multinationals to come. And it's kind of a dip your toe in the water thing, where we're not asking them for giant amounts. In a way, we can go, oh, okay, now we have a narrow list on both sides, either because the social entrepreneur knows how to take advantage, or you figure out that the corporate says, oh yeah, this is really for me. That's probably not the only way, but if there are ways to do it that are not just based on an individual person's sort of acuity and relationship building capacity, I think that's interesting. Because frankly, it's hard enough to make it work as it is. And I think if we can get better at figuring out on both sides where to invest the time, there'll probably be more yield.
So I've already made apparently a very good closing point for this, but I'll try to make something worth hearing again. I would say that post-investment, which it's hard enough to get it all together and get a deal through, but post-investment, there's this huge gap and this huge opportunity to gather more evidence about what models are working, not just what stories or examples like the ones I've given today, but the models that are working. And I think that's a huge opportunity for collaboration. I mean, inclusive business, impact investing, it's that if we're driven by some common sense of purpose, then we're all interested in which models work best. It's not that one will work well everywhere, I understand that, but we do need to get a little bit closer to different systems in different scenarios, thinking of the examples Megan gave earlier. And I think the more we collect that evidence, the more it incentivizes other players, the kind of players that we need, to be at venues like this, but to be entering the space in general. And so when you talk